Welcome to the Coaching Coordinator podcast and another episode in our Quickcast series. Our Quickcasts are episodes focused on a single topic delivered to you in 15 minutes or less. Before we go into today's Quickcast, I want to remind you to check out coachingcoordinator.com/magazine for the visual complement to the Coaching Coordinator podcast. We have it loaded with articles, coaching tips, video from coaches who have joined us on the podcast. You'll really be impressed with this one. Our features in this one are from Coach Mike Pettin, talking about double mug pressures, and Eli Drinkwitz, talking about how to put motion back into your offense. We wanted this to be different than any coaching magazine you've seen before, and so we make sure that we cover every single position in it. You'll get position tips from UCF, Cal, Miami of Ohio, Arkansas, Tulane, Mississippi State, Alabama, and Ohio State. We also have features on program building and special teams. You definitely want to check this one out at coachingcoordinator.com/magazine. Today's Quickcast is with Andy Kotelnicki, offensive coordinator at the University of Buffalo, talking to us about defeating the Tite Front and how he puts together and thinks about game planning for the Tite Front. You're going to want to check out his course on game planning at CoachTube. That will be linked in the show notes. In this first segment, Coach Kotelnicki talks about why he feels his first thought is to attack the perimeter with some type of perimeter play, especially something like the outside zone.
Well, as I said before a little bit, Keith, I think we want to start with a perimeter run play, an outside zone scheme, the stretch scheme. I think, doubling a 4-eye, up to a backer or something that is very doable for your offensive lineman to do. So it's going to put a lot of stress on those guys in that front. And again, I know you could, there's different ways to put different defenders in different spots. Okay. But I guess I'm talking about, where there's a 0, there's 2 4-eyes, there's 2 stack backers, and I know some places it can be a 0, 2 4-eyes, a 5 on one side, one stack backer, and then overhang on the other side. And so, I know there's all these variations, but I think anytime you have a guy who doesn't have his hand in the ground as your immediate C gap or D gap run defender, you should feel like you want to try to run at him right away because he's probably going to try to contain it, and that's going to be able to distort it, like you said. And then I think if you're a D end and you're playing inside the B gap there or head up, you're naturally out of position to be the contained guy there. So I think that you want to try to, probably get outside those guys a little bit, right? With some sort of perimeter outside zone play. And again, without talking 2 hours about all the different ways that you can handle blocking the perimeter, you obviously need to have some sort of answer for blocking the force player, right? Because that setup, as you said, it's all set up to spill over there on an inside zone scheme in the backside specifically. Well, if you attack it directly with an outside zone scheme, is it as strong for them to take that on, them being the defense? And so you got to make sure you feel good about how you're handling the force blocking. Right? There's a lot of different ways to do it. Whatever, a tight end over there, a lead back with a running back, or motion a receiver over, or whatever it might be. Okay, so we would always start there.
In this next segment, Coach Kotelnicki talks about the value of having some inside runs and being able to go downhill against this front as well.
If you want to run a vertical scheme, like a downhill scheme, I think you can still just keep running inside zone. But as you said, the ball is probably naturally, based off of how the double teams are going to be in the angles, it's naturally going to try to spill that backside D gap or C gap, right? Well, we would start to mess around with different ways to add in run or add in motion to put a hat on that guy who it's supposed to spill to. Can you now create an extra gap real quick so that he's unsure about how to fit it? Do I take it? Does he got to screw down real quick? Does he stay outside? Now with safety inserts to make that communication have to happen in those kind of fronts, I think is also another way to get to it. And then maybe a fold scheme in the backside over there.
In this next segment, Coach talks about the importance of having a multifaceted attack for the Tite Front.
A couple of years ago, I was in, 8 years ago now, I was in a league, was almost all 3-4. It was unique in that almost every team played a 3-4 front, and the exceptions were 4-man fronts. And so we got pretty versed at trying to figure out other ways to handle that. And I think using the 4 eyes techniques against them, and that maybe adding something like a fold scheme where the backside guard can fan out and the front side, the backside tackle, can fold around and insert. You're just running your inside zone scheme with a natural fold on the backside. It's just going to change the stimulus for the backer and how he fits it and the D end, and now he's not getting doubled anymore. He's not getting reached. You get a different look. He's getting a kick out block. There's another way that we do it, that we would handle that. Now your center gets put on the island there a little bit more. And those are one of the things you got to evaluate too. As teams slide in and out of that front, sometimes those noses, a lot of times they're either picking a gap or they're asking the 2 gap. Well, how well are they trained at doing that? How well is that guy at getting off a block, shedding a block, and making a tackle? Sometimes when you face opponents, you can look at them and you say, that guy's not very good at that. Okay, so you can be comfortable just asking your center to go, mano a mano on that guy a little bit, which I know, whatever, O-line coaches across the country are like, oh, whatever, this guy's full of crap. So, but it has to happen sometimes, right? You got to be able to do that every once in a while. Again, these are all just kind of like we talked about with versus +1. This has to be, you can't just holistically only do one of these things. You have to be able to do all of them. You can't just sit there and say, we only run outside zone versus tight front. Well, no. Okay, we're only going to run the fold scheme. Well, no. We've also, zone released, front side tackle on a power read scheme, and read the 4 eye, like we talked about before. I think it's a really powerful way to get the ball there in the perimeter. Those are all things that you can do, I think, to kind of mess with those techniques a little bit. I think what you need to be able to do is try to identify when they're getting into it, why they're getting into it, and then feeling comfortable to attack it.
Coach talks about the importance of planning for the tight front and for the best opponents on your schedule.
And again, it goes back to making sure your base run game. And I encourage people to do this too. I said you should really, the teams that you're trying to beat as it applies to putting a game plan together, okay, in your league. So maybe you're I've used this before. Let's say you're a high school coach and you're a state championship contender year in, year out. And you do a good job in your league. There's always that one team within your league that always gives you a challenge, and that's your close game. And then you get into the playoffs, and in your section, in your division, they're the 2 teams that you always have to go through. Okay, well, what is that one team in your league and those 2 teams that you feel like you got to play every year to go through to get to the state championship? What do those 3 teams do defensively that you feel like you need to beat, right? Are they a tight front team? Well, you better make sure that you feel like your kids know and understand how to go against that front. Are they a cover 1 football team and nobody else that you play does that stuff? Well, then you got to make sure that your guys are getting reps through training camp and, spring, fall, summer camp and spring football of attacking that coverage or that front. I think one of the things that we always do is we get so wrapped up on, in our world, a lot of Division I football is, over under cover 4, and it is. Okay, well, those teams that are over under cover 4 are those one of those teams that feel like we identify that we have to beat. So I gave the scenario about a team that's contending for the state championship consistently, trying to figure out the 3 other top teams in the state. Well, your program might be, consistently a 500 team, but we're always struggling against, whatever team A, B, and C that are always 7-3. Those are the 3 teams that we got to make sure schematically that we feel like we can beat consistently. And I know I don't like saying this because you always want to take one game at a time, and you do. But are you all of a sudden, are those teams consistently beating you? Are you struggling against them because you don't have anything prepared for those teams, right? Or the thoughts about those teams or those opponents. So it goes back to, again, holistically understanding that it's easy to scheme up against the teams that you're beating all the time. But what about the team that for your program to take the next step? So, personally, for an example that I dealt with when we were at Wisconsin Whitewater for those couple of years, there was 2 teams in the league that had given us fits, 3 technically, schematically. And after our first fall there, my first fall, I should say, a lot of other offensive coaches that have, but our first fall there, that whole summer, I looked at those 3 opponents and said, what are we going to need schematically to make sure that we beat these 3 teams? You know what I mean? Or we do better than we did the last the year before to schematically to beat them. And so, one of the teams was, as we're talking about, was an odd front team. They were a 3-4 team that was different than all the other teams. And that's kind of when I had an aha. I was like, you know what, dude, we're spending way too much time in fall camp going against our defense and the 4-man front. We need to make sure that we're spending time in individual drills. We're talking about maybe doing a little bit of time, in a group setting versus a scout team where we can get a little work against some odd front teams, because our guys need to make sure that we understand how to handle that double team versus a 4-eye now, because he's not a 3 anymore, or a 2-eye, right? How to double the 0. So you got to kind of take a big picture of the course of the season. Again, you don't want to go past the next game that you're playing, but you have to feel like, okay, week 5, we're going to play this kind of front. Our guys have to be ready to handle it. Or week 5, we're now going to be playing an exclusively man coverage team. We have to be able to handle it. Okay. And you see it a lot when teams prepare to play an option football team. They'll spend time in fall camp or spring football. They'll spend a lot of time talking about, preparing to defend the option, and do extra work on that to make sure that when all of a sudden we're talking about defending it, the first time they hear about it isn't the game week. And so I think the Union do the same thing as it applies to 3-4 teams or 4 down front teams. The first time you're repping it can't be when you're actually going to play them that week.
Thanks again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. Go to coachandcoordinator.com/magazine to get the visual complement to the podcast with Coach and Coordinator Monthly, our free digital magazine. Follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski, and check out the show notes for all the links we mentioned, like Coach Kotelnicki's course on CoachTube covering the game planning process. Show notes can be found in the description in your podcast app, as well as at coachandcoordinator.com.